Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first WPA virtual webinar. We're very excited about today's session, and we've got some excellent speakers with us from the WPA board who are going to be giving us their insight and their response to COVID-19. You can also access our other virtual material from the WPA, including a recent podcast that we did with Councillor Matthew Green, who is Cabinet Member for Business and Planning at Westminster City Council, and also a podcast with the new leadership team of Real Estate Balance, which is all up on our WPA website. So I'm just going to start off with some introductions. By way of introduction, I'm Caroline Haynes and I'm an Assistant Development Manager at Derwent London and also a member of the WPA NextGen Committee. And today I'm also joined by my colleague Matt Barrett, who is an Asset Manager at CBRE Global Investors and also a fellow member of the WPA NextGen Committee. So to introduce our speakers for you today, I'm absolutely delighted to say that we're going to be speaking with Olivia Harris, who is WPA Chair and CEO of Dolphin Living, Paul Williams, WPA Vice Chair and CEO of Derwent London, and Brian Bickell, WPA Deputy Vice Chair and CEO of Shaftesbury. So thank you all very much for joining us today. So this event is part of our Spotlight Series, which was launched by the WPA NextGen earlier this year. We've since hosted several virtual events exploring the future of working in Westminster and plan to launch a best practice guide over the next coming weeks. So do keep a lookout for this. The WPA NextGen programme is supported by Gardner and Theobald, so I just want to take a moment to thank G&T for their kind sponsorship. Right, so moving now on to the event, we'd like to start firstly by asking the WPA leadership team, who we have with us today, our first question. Firstly, where are you now and what have you experienced over the past few weeks, given everything that's been going on? So, each of you in turn, but I'd like to firstly direct it to Olivia. Please, if you can just give us a bit of background on where you are and what you've been experiencing.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to do this. Unsurprisingly, like pretty much everyone else, I'm at home, and like everyone, the events of March were eventful, including the fact that I didn't get to go to Rome to see England beat Italy in the Six Nations rugby. I was focusing on moving our team to remote working and shutting down the office. I had to accept that I find change quite stressful, and once I accepted that, I started feeling a bit less stressed. There's been some real positives. Learning to use Zoom and Teams has been great, a real experience, and changing the way we work as we move to home working with more structured catch-ups in place of informal chats in the office and a new regime of weekly team drinks, including quizzes and bingo. I've done a lot of work engaging with politicians and government officers on behalf of the Westminster Property Association to collaborate on the decisions we need to make as property owners, landlords and stakeholders in the area in Westminster. It's been really interesting changing my routine to adapt to full-time working from home, making sure I switch off my laptop, iPad and phone at the right time and avoiding back-to-back meetings. It's been interesting realising much of what I do can be done at home, yet I massively miss the variety and socialisation that you get from coming into the office.
Yeah, I think as we all do. Brian, how about you?
Well, I'm sitting in Marylebone, still in the West End, so my whole life is the West End, really. That's what Shaftesbury does. I suppose when all this started off, I just got back from Florida. Paul and I separately had been to Citibank conference for property investors. It seems like a lifetime ago, really. I actually stayed on for a few days holiday to go and see some friends in Sarasota. And I'm actually rather glad I did that because it looks as though that's going to be my only holiday of 2020. I didn't realise that at the time. But it came back to a world that changed very rapidly as from the second week of March and lockdown started. You know, it's been an experience, good things and bad things. I suppose I was a bit of a cynic about the idea from working from home, but I admit I'm a a bit of a generational dinosaur when it comes to that, brought up in a sort of 9-to-5 regime. And I can see now it does work, and technology has made it possible over the last couple of years, but it's going to alter the way we work. And it's got a lot of positives, but the negatives, the lack of social interaction, really, the spontaneous conversations with colleagues, the socializing and what have you, is quite challenging, really, even though you know, I have a nice environment to work in here. It's not the same as being at the office. And we're now very much turning our attention to how the next few months looks at Shaftesbury and how we get back to the office. From a personal basis, I've realised my partner and I have lived in this house for 14 years. I've never really lived here. I've suddenly realised I go out to work still Monday to Friday with quite a good social life, a lot of it attached to work during the week. And of course, at weekends, you know, we're either away, we've got a flat down in Brighton. I'm never here. So actually, I've really enjoyed, when I'm not working, spending this whole period living at home. I feel as I've never lived here before. The environment's a bit odd, really, because it is just so quiet in the West End around Maryland. There's hardly anybody here. We realise now there was a pool of pollution over the West End. You can never see the sun properly. This is like being in the Mediterranean now when it comes to clear blue skies. And you can hear the birds singing, not coughing in the morning because the pollution's gone away. So these are positives. And when you realise what can be achieved when we, well, accidentally, I suppose, in this instance, one of the things we will be thinking about, I'm sure, in the West End is these environmental improvements we've suddenly seen overnight. How do we hang on to some of these when life does start to pick up again? So, it's a reminder that whilst these other problems of air quality and whatever seem insurmountable, strange enough, they can be dealt with quite quickly with the right will. But lots of good things, lots of bad things, and you know, just trying to keep the team now focused on the future. Future will be very different from the past. We've got to prepare for the future because I think it is going to be such an upheaval in the world of real estate coming to us.
Yeah, certainly. We're definitely going to be touching on the whole flexible working and sort of what your views are of that as we carry on. Paul, how about you? Last but not least.
Well, as you could see, I've been in the West Indies. I've been telling all the staff that I'm time travelling, so I've decided to change my background every 2 weeks when I do my town hall. So currently, you'll see I'm in my island hideaway in the West Indies. Seriously, I'm out in the countryside, which a bit like Brian, I don't see my house very often. I certainly don't see my wife and my children very often. So what has been a surprise from this is just how many parcels get delivered at home and just how much cardboard I'm having to burn every weekend. So that's been a interesting thing. But you know, we've been busy fair few weeks. I think we did lockdown on my birthday. I had a big birthday this year on March 18th, and I'd arranged drinks for everyone in the office and managed to cancel everything by sending everyone home. So we've been doing town halls every 2 weeks. A bit like Brian, I suspect there've been a lot of investor meetings. I'm sure that Olivia's got different types of meetings as well as CEO, but a lot of investor meetings. I think I had 42 last week on one day, 32 the week before, letting people know what's going on, because obviously analysts and investors want to know what's going to happen with our offices going forward, what's going to happen with London. So that's happening. We had our Q1 results, which we brought forward from back to April, updating the market on rents and all those sort of things. So a lot of investor stuff, but also a lot of con calls at home. I just realised I'm sat at my desk at home for X hours a day, tied to this screen, and I'm not getting up an ability to go meet people, bump into people. So I am missing the social interaction. I'm missing very much the ability to meet clients and customers. And so we did a lot of that sort of work as well. But while Zoom is brilliant, Teams is brilliant, etc., it's not the same as the personal interaction. And but all is well. I've been with the business 36 years, seen many different cycles. We've seen Brexit, we've seen the global financial crisis, saw the 1990s where things were terrible. So we'll all get through it. I think things will change, and you know, we will make opportunities and challenges. But I would depress you less about where I'm pretending to be now and go back to my old screen.
Thanks, Paul. And in terms of moving on to other questions to frame it, we're going to start with kind of your individual company responses to a few questions, and then we'll move on to Westminster as a whole, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some audience Q&A. So kicking off, how are your companies responding to COVID-19 restrictions if we park home working aside for now? If we start with Olivia.
Yes, Dolphin Living provides intermediate rental housing for working Londoners, so slightly different from a lot of other WPA members. And so our focus has been on making sure that we can still provide our residents with, a safe, secure home and carry out the essential repairs that they need to be carried out, but also have regard for their concerns over COVID-19 and the fact that they want to, have social distancing and may not want to have other people in their homes. So alongside that, as part of a landlord, we've been having to look at our rent collection and work with tenants, monitor that really, really closely, probably like, all other property companies. Fortunately for us, residential rent collections have, at least for April, have remained quite high, and we're getting quite good results in for May, but, it's different, and it's something that, you really need to track incredibly carefully. And then I suppose, again, like other property companies, we've got developments. We've had one development they've been amazing. They hadn't come off site. They put social distancing into place really early on. But, we as the ultimate owner of that property have got a responsibility towards that. So alongside a lot of other landlords and developers, we've been looking at our development sites and, having to reforecast our budgets based on when we think those are going to complete, and also how long those are going to take to let up, and finding different ways of doing that, so different ways of reporting repairs, different ways of letting up, different levels of repairs service, all sorts of things that we've had to adapt to. These changes would normally take, if you were making changes like that, they would take months to implement, and everybody's had to implement those in the matter of a couple of weeks. So it's been quite challenging, but really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. And then Paul, how are Derwent dealing with these COVID-19 restrictions?
Well, as I say, we're working well from home well, but I mean, we've got a big portfolio. It's all in central London, and we used to joke we had the ultimate environmental policy. If we couldn't walk to a building, we weren't interested. So it's basically the buildings are open, but the occupation levels are very, very, very small, because obviously people are all home working. So the big focus is making sure our customer base is a good place. Obviously March quarter day was a focus to get those rents in. Luckily for us, we have a very small element of retail, only about 10% retail restaurants. It's really just amenity for our offices. So we've been focused on that, and we've been looking after our occupiers on a needs basis, mostly on those that need the most help we've been giving. And obviously our focus now is going to be the June quarter day. We have got a big pipeline, and we've de-risked a lot of that. I think 70% is pre-let. But our focus is on major scheme at 80 Charlotte Street, which was due to complete just a few days after lockdown. So I think we were due to complete on the 25th of March, and lockdown came for us on the 18th, and our contractor decided to close down. They're now back, so I think hopefully we'll get that up PC in the next few weeks or so, and the focus will be on the next of the pipeline. So it's really, we're principally investment business. Asset management is our core of our business. So it's basically looking after our various hundreds of tenants, make sure they're in a good place, looking after the well-being of that, and also our site staff, because obviously we manage everything in-house. So we've got a lot of people on site, so keeping people well and safe and keeping them focused. We chose not to furlough any of our staff, and I think others have done similarly. We chose, I think, one of the early ones to decide to make some sacrifices on our salaries. So we've been working very well with our communities, making sure that some of that money goes to NHS and our two principal communities. So it's really working with people locally. And I think one of the benefits of this, when we see it, I think people as a society will be working better together. So, and I think one of the strengths of WPA is that we're able to reach out and reach all sorts of people, including, of course, Westminster Council, which is very important. And Brian, Olivia and I have been working, and that's slightly on the agenda, very hard to make sure we're connected to Westminster, the right levels, to make sure we're joined up.
Thank you. And hopefully, I mean, that's one of the long-term kind of outputs of this crisis, is that whole community spirit. So hopefully that is something that's here to stay. And then Brian, if you wouldn't mind covering Shaftesbury.
Well, of course, Shaftesbury, we find ourselves in a particular situation. The portfolio is 15 acres of in the heart of the West End. And if you take a step back and think what makes the West End so lively and so prosperous, is the 200 million plus visits every year. There's a whole range of people that come here, and people think it's all about tourists. It's not really. The bedrock of the success of the West End is Londoners. and the people who come in and out of London to work every day. In a way, you could say the tourists, whether they're domestic or international, are the icing on the cake, but they do together give us a 7-day-a-week economy. So the speed of the shutdown, looking back, was just quite incredible, really. We saw it in the very early days, and people remember back to February, that shortly after Chinese New Year, people started avoiding Chinatown. Well, by the 3rd week of February, Chinatown was pretty much closed down. Well, remarkable in itself. I mean, it's one of the busiest parts of the West End. People were just not going there. And of course, within a couple of weeks, the rest of the West End had caught up with that. So that leaves us with some 600, just over 600 shops, restaurants, bars, cafes, pubs and clubs, which are closed, with currently very little prospect of opening. It's quite a challenge, really. Obviously, we have some more offices, but the ground floors provide 70% of our income. So this whole situation is a particular challenge for us. Obviously, we're conscious that the best way to maintain the long-term value in our portfolio, it's quite simple, is to maintain the occupancy and the income flow. So right from the outset, and bearing in mind, we've had a strategy really of avoiding the predictable, strong covenant retail restaurant operations you find everywhere, which are not very exciting, frankly. They're a bit formulaic. Try and find something different. So we've got a very largely different sort of tenant base of smaller groups and independents, very cash flow sensitive. We realised their businesses had sort of juddered to a halt with probably not great reserves to keep them going. So to use a very topical analogy, those businesses are in the intensive care ward now. Our job is to bring them back to recovery, bring them back to the recovery ward, and then get them to stand on their own 2 feet. But this process is not 1 quarter or 2 quarters. The reality of the situation in the West End, and a government that is determined, and rightly so, to maintain social distancing wherever possible and discourage these huge congregations of people, is that the West End is probably going to be towards the back of the queue for recovery. And as much as we all talk about it, I'm sure a lot of us work in the West End, people are reluctant to come in on trains. These are discretionary visits if you're not working here. Are people really going to rush to do that again? Our office is going to be particularly full for the rest of this year. I think we're all learning, as we said before, to work from home. So in a way, you could take a step back and say some of these trends were there before, but what COVID seems to have done is accelerated them, compressed them into a relatively short space of time. Yes, we were starting to see more flexible working in offices. You only had to be around the West End on a Friday, and you see there weren't many people around. And certainly, if Shaftesbury's office was anything to go by, there's hardly anybody around on Friday. But that's, that trend was going on. But so I think we've become better at working from home now. So we've got something out of that. We've talked before. Everybody's talked about what was going on in retail. Is retail the driver of footfall that it used to be? What do retailers want out of the space we provide for them? I think that's going to accelerate. Obviously, retail has been shut down. We're shopping online probably more. People are saying the volume of online is shooting up rapidly. We're probably where people thought we might be sort of 5 years down the line. It's suddenly become a commodity. The bigger picture is you ask yourself, are we losing the shopping habit? Are we managing to live our lives without shopping for things nice to have, but don't have to have? That may be another trend that we were seeing, I think, in a younger generation, possibly less materialistic than the generations over the last 20, 30, 40 years. In terms of eating out, well, I mean, people want to socialise. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But for Shaftesbury, our restaurants are generally small, very atmospheric, predicated on rapid turn of tables and 7 days a week. It's going to be a while to get back to all of that. So lots of things to be thinking about. But as I say, the sense that it's accelerated a number of trends that were already bubbling away in the background is quite interesting, I think. So that's what we're focused on, really, and to keep the team focused on thinking about what this new future may hold, the way it's going to affect real estate generally, the way we lease up our properties, what tenants are looking for, the extra services landlords are going to have to provide. It's a time of rapid change for all of us. I'm sure we're going to talk about how we're going to start thinking about some of these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely come on to that. And yeah, it sounds like a period of innovation might be required for retail. So my next question then, what policies are you putting in place to support your staff working from home? And I guess, how have you all found that transition? Perhaps start with Olivia again. Ladies first.
Yeah. So I'm really fortunate. I've been working flexibly on and off for the last 16 years, but actually it's still been quite a shock for me to have to work full time from home. You know, I worked part time when my children were young. I worked a variety of working from home and, you know, working fairly flexible hours. But this full time working from home is something very different. You know, we've got a small team at Dolphin, so we've taken a flexible approach, really trying to meet individual needs. You know, very simply, first of all, making sure everybody had the hardware and the software that they needed in order to be able to work from home. And then after a couple of weeks, checking in with staff to see how they're going. You know, the mental health aspects of working from home have kind of been quite widely reported, and we've just been really cognizant of that, of making sure that, you know, no one in the team feels isolated, because work is a big part of their social interaction each week. And then looking at training needs that people might need because they're struggling to adapt with working from home, and asking what else we can offer. And I think then there's another thing, we've all changed massively in a very short period of time how we work, but that change shouldn't stop. You know, we should continue looking at new ways of how we might be more adaptable, how we might be more flexible in the way that we work. We've had to be, probably like all employers, be flexible about working hours. And some of my staff are at home and they've got young children and no childcare. I'm very lucky mine are teenagers, so I just have to get away from my desk every now and then to shout at them to put down their screens and get off the phone and stop playing on the Xbox. But, you know, for those people who've got young children, that's been a real challenge the past few weeks. And as an employer, we've just had to make sure that, you know, ultimately they and their families are okay first, and they, you know, they fit their work essentially around their families. And then making sure that everybody feels connected. You know, we've got, you know, the HR work, because we're not recruiting, for example, is less. So one of the things we're asking HR to do is just to keep in contact with staff and making sure people are okay. And one thing I've done, someone suggested this really early on, is I've sent by post handwritten cards to staff, and it's really amazing the impact that's had. Someone actually phoned me up and said, I cried when I got it, and I was like, that's not what was supposed to happen. But, you know, there are lots of different ways about keeping in touch and just making sure people feel valued, even if you can't see them face to face.
Sounds great. I mean, my mother-in-law posted brownies to all of her staff, actually. So yeah, similar vein. So Paul, how about Derwent? I assume you're obviously well versed with flexible working from home policies anyway, but how has the transition been for you?
You know, we've been working on agile working for some time. It's been obviously been a desire of a lot of our staff that they can work agile. And you know, when I first came to work was 9 till 5, and you clocked in and you clocked out. And I've been joking for some time. I'm sure Gary agrees with it. The sort of Derwent model is working from 5 till 9, really. But anyway, but trying to make sure that. But actually, there's a lot of work staying in touch. Indeed, we sent a little presents round today to some of our popular management people, and just a little personal note from me to say thank you, because I think that really is important. You know, I'm doing my town halls every 2 weeks, and hopefully Carrie will give that a reasonable reference. But it's staying in touch with people, encouraging people, but also trusting people. And I think reality is, because we've got technology and it works, you know, we can't be there supervising every day of all their work. You've got to trust people and encourage people. You know, when I first went to work, we used to have a thing called the pinks. I don't know whether Brian had a similar thing, where carbons, I mean, you young people will not understand this at all. There'd be a carbon copy of a letter, and every Friday I would take them home, read everyone's letter, work out what the hell was going on in life, and then sending back a few comments, changing their grammar and all the rest of it. Now, we don't get carbons anymore because everyone sent emails. So it's been basically staying in touch. The business has adapted brilliantly to the people to home working and staying in touch. The team leaders are doing really well, but there's a strong desire to all get back to our lovely offices, to be working together. We will have to do that responsibly. I've been saying to the staff that I'm not rushing people back. I agree with Brian, it's going to take some time. We have a duty to make sure there's a second wave. I said on Monday that we were celebrating last Friday the big sacrifices a previous generation had made for our behalf, and I think at the moment is for those that lead our business, etc. We should be encouraging people to make some small sacrifices, and if that means not coming back to work yet and being a bit lonely, we'll have to support them. And I think we're there to try and encourage, get people back people back safely. So, but it's been a busy time, and you know, as I say, I saw Barclays saying home working, they won't have big offices anymore. It's all well and good for us that have got nice homes with gardens and all the rest, to be sitting at home in our studies. But if you're flat sharing with 2 or 3 other people, and you've got no room to work and you've got no room to breathe, it's not the same. So I think we're going to try and get people back well and responsibly and healthily and happily. So that's what's been the focus. So we've adapted well, but the business is all about adaptability. And that's what we create as an organisation. If you look at our white collar factory and things like that, that's how we will respond to what the future needs to be. I'm sure you'll have some questions on that.
Thank you, Paul. And Brian, to finish off.
Well, I think I'd be the first to admit we weren't at the forefront of flexible working, so we've had a rapid learning curve, and there have been good things and bad things have come out of it. But I try and get everybody to focus on the good things, the new things that we're forced to think about and address. And we had a team call earlier today, and a lot of people were saying we've learned how we can manage our time better when we're in the office. We, inevitably. With business where a lot of us have been around a long time, things were becoming a little bit overly structured, I would say. We sort of we're stuck in a time warp, but in a way we've got a lot of baggage that actually being away from the office from this period is making us think about why we do certain things and how we do things better in a different sort of way. So I think for us it's been a bit of a jolt, but we're coming to terms with it. Yes, I think people have different stresses. It's, those of us who sit at home with plenty of space and rooms you can go and shut yourself away and don't understand what it's like to live in small environments where you cannot isolate. It is a problem that, even for me, work sits here up in the loft because the PC's there and even the television's over there. So when you're looking at the television, you feel work is staring over your shoulder probably more than ever before. And I think that's people are realising going to work is a break from home life and vice versa. And it becomes a continuum if you're not careful. So there's lots to learn about, I think, from working from home. And I think we're all just beginning to realise that. But it'll make flexible working more efficient when we do go back to having a bit of both, really. The other challenge for Shaftesbury is that our office was in Carnaby Street. We literally worked above the shop. Nothing we owned was more than 15 minutes walk from the office, probably, well, actually 20 minutes. Can't walk so far these days at our age. But probably even more local than Paul. And it was a sense of being there. And we were talking about that today. Our tenants are used to seeing us around. We are so local. Every tenant is shop or restaurant. We choose them. We know them. They're used to, we're just part of their community and they of ours. So the fact that we've lost this for a time being is that, in a way, we've got to go back. And if we believe that the West End's a safe place to go, we can't sit at home saying that. We've got to be part of it. So that's, again, something particular to Shaftesbury we've got to get our heads around. I have suggested to the team that when we do all go back, we have a little understanding that people only spend money in Shaftesbury shops and restaurants because they need all the help they can get. So no going off, no more Amazon, forget it. You spend it in one of our properties. We'll never get our rent paid.
I'll tell you what, I already go to a Shaftesbury restaurant for you, Brian, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
If everybody listening in could do that as well, our life would be much easier.
Okay. So I suppose, Brian, you've just touched on some of the challenges faced by Shaftesbury. So I suppose just moving on to as leaders of your organisations, any unique challenges or indeed opportunities that have sort of arisen out of this situation. So Paul, perhaps we can go to you first, I suppose, around opportunities or other challenges.
Well, I mean, there's always opportunities from a challenge. I mean, just starting on the sort of the challenge, what I'm giving a lot of thought at the moment is how we reopen the portfolio properly and how offices are going to be worked from a common parts point of view. We've got a portfolio of sort of £5.5 billion, sort of 6 million square feet, lots of multi-let buildings, and just working out at the moment that when we do reopen, how do we get lifts to be used safely? What we do about staircases going up and staircases going down, and do we have multiple exits and all the rest of it? How do I keep my site staff clean? What do I do about the extra cleanliness? But so there's a lot of challenge and thought going through. I've got a committee meeting on that tomorrow, not just reopening my office, but also the portfolio and keeping our tenants safe. So that is a challenge, because I think we locked down quickly. We were well prepared. We've got good IT and our we've got a great IT department, but getting back is going to be a more difficult and more slow process. We're going to have to do it responsibly. So that's been a challenge. But as to opportunities, I mean, as hinted before, I've seen so many cycles. I've been thinking about what tenants need, and I think 8 years ago I sat down. We had this thing called a tenant forum, and we had to actually listen to our customers, which is probably unusual for a landlord because traditionally we had reputation was we didn't. And we worked out what tenants wanted, and we created a tenant forum. We listened, and we provided the white collar factory, which is very, very adaptable space. It doesn't recirculate its air. It's got fresh air as well. It's got big common parts. It's got good volume and light. It's got passive cooling systems. And it gave us an opportunity to think about tenants' needs and no dilapidations and inability to change the space. And I slightly regret we haven't done more of them. And so at the moment, I'm thinking about what's my next white collar factory. Well, I know we've got the Featherstone next door, which you're working on, and what space can we create in the future that hopefully will be better for in these sort of circumstances? Would deal with things like wellness. So we might have some running tracks and gyms and cycle bays, but what can we do about buildings that are adaptable, can deal with COVID, but also and other such things, but also make space more attractive to our occupiers? And that I see as a challenge, but a real opportunity. It gives us an opportunity to hopefully stay ahead in our particular sector. So I'm actually quite excited by it. And actually, strangely, despite being a CEO only since last May, although I've been in the business a long time, I quite enjoy myself. I'm quite thinking, look, every challenge comes with an opportunity. As I hinted before, there's been many other generations who've had a lot worse thing to do with than Olivia, Brian, and I have having to do with. You see Captain Tom and those real heroes. So just got to be positive, grab it, and deal with it.
Yeah. And Olivia, how about Dolphin living?
Yeah, so I suppose unlike Paul's experience and Brian's experience, our business hasn't shut down in the same way because people are still living in their homes. But that brings different challenges, around people's anxiety about being able to pay their rent and about their home. And we always have to remember that this is someone's home, so their response is going to be often emotional rather than rational. In the residential sector broadly, there's been a lot of work, as we all know, being done on fire safety, and that's been one of the challenges to keep that work going. And there's been quite a lot of negative press, probably in the residential side, about people not keeping that going, but that's been really challenging. I think the opportunity for Dolphin Living is, we provide homes for rent in central London for key workers on modest incomes. And we're the only organisation in London that solely focuses on key workers renting. And the pandemic has increased public awareness of what key workers do and the benefit of them living close to their place of work. And I think it also calls for a redefining of who are our key workers. Traditionally key workers have been NHS workers and teachers, and I think we've seen in this recent months that key workers include supermarket workers and delivery drivers. So it's moving towards all of those who support London's infrastructure, which aligns very closely with the charitable objects of Dolphin Living. So we've been working really hard, with WPA, but also through our own name, to promote homes for key workers. And many of the board at WPA have expressed concerns about affordability of housing and about providing homes for key workers, and that's what development in central London will continue to deliver. And the need for key workers, key worker housing is also supported by a survey carried out by YouGov for Dolphin Living, which sets out that renters prioritise their work commute when considering where to live, and over 90% they think their commute shouldn't be more than an hour. So we do need to continue delivering homes for key workers in central London. And so we've really taken that as an opportunity to kind of shout out about that, because I think it's an area of the housing market that's missed when you look at housing policy and housing needs statements, because there's very much a focus on providing homes for those who are in acute housing need, and providing homes in central London for those that can afford to pay for it. And actually there's this big part of the population who traditionally might have been able to live in central London but haven't been able to afford it in recent years, and we're making a real opportunity to show how valuable those people are to the London economy.
Thanks. And another one for you, Olivia, if that's okay. So we had the London Property Alliance podcast last week with Councillor Matthew Green, and he was stating that the City Council still aims to deliver over 2,000 affordable houses by 2023. So how do you think the industry can kind of fund and deliver affordable housing for key workers post-COVID? And also just interested as to kind of the direct support that you're able to offer your tenants at this time.
So I think one of the things that Westminster has done unusually as a city council is prioritise the intermediate housing, and that's what I was saying, it's the difference between the traditional social and council housing. The development industry, we've been working with Westminster on the city plan, because through that city plan they want to see the delivery of the housing that Matthew was talking about last week. And for that reason, it's essential that property development continues. You know, it's redevelopment of offices, it's redevelopment of retail that will deliver that housing for Westminster. And so I think it's really important that WPA and its members and other, you know, keeps a really open dialogue with Westminster, which is what we at WPA are aiming to do. And I think Paul mentioned earlier that, you know, we've had a lot of conversations with the City Council. I'm also in a weekly meeting with Nikki Aiken, who used to be the leader of the City Council, but is the local MP. You know, but it's about how we can work together, the public and the private sectors, to deliver that housing. And you know, hopefully the approach that Westminster's taken about delivering intermediate housing, which, because the rents are slightly higher, you can deliver more affordable housing overall, or you know, it gives you a better ability to have viable developments delivering affordable housing. You know, hopefully that message will be spread into other local authorities. I know I've had conversations with a few of them quite recently. So, you know, that's a really positive. You asked about assistance to tenants.
Yeah, just in terms of what you're...
Yeah, it's probably like in the same way as the retail and commercial property owners. It's about saying to tenants, if you can afford to pay your rent, please pay your rent. But so that we've got the resources to help those that most need the help. And a lot of that is about, you know, if people have lost their jobs or their salaries have decreased quite significantly, they may be able to claim housing benefit, but there's a time lag in that. So we're accepting a level of arrears that we wouldn't normally accept, but working with our tenants to make sure that eventually they can pay their rent. And I think there's another point about, I think I mentioned before, about accessing people's homes. You know, we need to carry out our compliance works, we need to keep, but we have to respect tenants may not want people in their homes at this period of time. So it's about balancing, you know, the risks of not carrying out repairs versus the risks of people contracting COVID-19.
So communication being key then. Absolutely,
and making sure, you know, we outsource our property management, and the property manager at first was trying to show that, you know, they were keeping their staff safe when they were getting them to do work in homes. And I said, well, actually, you need to show how you're going to keep our tenants safe as well, because otherwise you're not going to get access. So it's balancing both the workers and the people who are living in the home to make sure that the safety works can be carried out.
Thank you.
Brian, just can I touch with you on, I suppose, going back to the impact on retail, given, I suppose, the government's announcement earlier this week to say that retail and hospitality are unlikely to be opened at least until sort of the second and third phases of lockdown. So I suppose what actions do you at Shaftesbury see need to be put into place to make sure that retail and hospitality can sort of overcome this challenge? And also, do you see whether COVID-19 is going to provide any opportunity to reform business rates in any way, and also use class orders?
I suppose at Shaftesbury, we've always felt very close to our, particularly our retail and F&B tenants. They're our largest source of income. And we've always said, and we've said quite openly, if those businesses are not prospering, then we won't prosper. So I think you're seeing that now in spades, that obviously they're not trading and we've got to help them trade. So we are actually talking to everyone about those 600 businesses and structuring plans, not just the immediate situation, but actually, you know, being realistic, what support will they be looking for when they open up, and probably for some considerable time next year before they get anything like their volumes of trade coming back. As I say, I think if you think about the economy here, it's not going to be some sort of light switch moment when everybody suddenly comes flooding back in. You know, the absence of international travel, probably for at least all of next year, if not longer, that's how it seems. You know, is a big part of obviously people's weekend trade, for instance. So those are issues. So as I said before, it's important we nurse our tenants through this bit. But one of the things that's sprung up out of this, and I say it's always been there, is the fact that there are other long-term owners in the West End who are in the same boat as us. Westminster City Council wants to see the West End back on its feet again. The collaboration is starting already. There's always been collaboration, but I think it's sort of stepped up a gear or two now. So there's an estates group that we meet virtually with the leader every fortnight. We're looking at particular work streams at the moment. So there's one piece of work that's gone in already called Safe Streets, and how it's actually, we can use the space we have in the West End, obviously very space constrained, to make it more comfortable for people to come back here, to feel they're not going to be pushed and jostled. There is some prospect of maintaining social distancing. It's going to be very difficult in lots of places. We're not saying it's not. But if we all work together and bring ideas forward to the City Council and the Mayor of London, that's going to be very useful. But this general coordination of all the big owners in the West End, we need to bring the West End back together. None of us can do it on our own. So we've probably got to be even more collaborative than we have been in the past. And then, you know, if we're going to think about sustainability issues in the West End, again, this provides a good platform for sharing our knowledge and experience, because these are West End wide issues that we have to deal with. So good things are coming out of this. But I think, as I say, we all accept it's going to be a long haul, and the progress out of the current situation may not be linear. You know, I think we all have to accept there could be some setbacks along the way, and things are not going to happen as quickly as anybody hoped. But I think sense of realism, working together, is the best way that we will all get out of this. And of course, in all of that, WPA has an important role to play. It does marshal the property owners across the borough, and it is a very useful forum to have dialogue with Westminster City Council. So they're very amenable to those conversations. So that's good. Next piece of work, one of the pieces of work we're thinking about is licensing and planning. And yes, use class orders that sort of came along in whenever it was the 1940s are looking a bit out of date now. You could question their relevance. So I think there's certainly a good reason for short-term flexibility around use classes, around licensing, things like that. If we want to get the West End on back on its feet, that's what you've got to do. But it'd become a test bed for things that actually people have been very nervous about relaxing. But actually, when we do relax them, we might find there are no serious adverse consequences, and sense that the city needs to move on and be more flexible, because life's changing a lot anyway. As I said, this is just an acceleration of what was going on before. This could be a catalyst for experimentation and new ideas. And again, not all of those will work, but we can all be realistic about it. But there's an imperative now to try them. On the question of business rates, well, you know, this should have been addressed 30, 40 years ago, and it's just rumbled on. I'd like to, it certainly should be addressed now, but I suspect, you know, this is a government problem, really. Does the government have the bandwidth at the moment? The cynical may say, does it have the intellect as well to address this quite knotty problem? It certainly is becoming more of an issue, but the reality is, with the current situation, and remember we still have Brexit bubbling in the background, what the bandwidth is to address this in any reasonable time frame, I think is limited. But again, WPA are putting some thoughts together behind the scenes about some ideas to present to the government as an important forum for important owners of property about some of the issues here and some of the potential solutions. So again, it's collaboration will hopefully provide the answers for government. They need things served up on a plate at the moment.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
And Paul, if we can ask you to get your crystal ball out, what are your kind of predictions, I guess, for occupier demand in the long term for offices? You know, moving away from perhaps, you know, short-term noise of, you know, what people are talking about with, you know, the rise of flexible working from home. You know, where do you see, you know, long-term occupier demand for office space? If you could.
Well, I mean, firstly, I should say my shares in Hindsight Investments are doing very well, as are my shares, and I Told You So. That's my wife's shares, actually, and they've performed really well. So crystal ball is very difficult. I think a bit like Brian was saying, things are changing anyway. You may well see that COVID's, but I don't necessarily think it's a trigger for a complete change. In as much as we are still very much social animals, I think, you know, one of my jobs is to make sure that we keep creating product that people want to take and flexible. We've been speaking to a lot of our tenants, and you could see that actually people can occupy less densely. The max packing may well disappear. You know, you may not, you know, desk sharing may well disappear. But when talking to some quite intelligent people recently, they're talking about having more space, but in a less densely occupied, using their offices to support their brand, thinking about how they can come together without being too close. So I suspect there will be still a strong demand for office space. And I remember the days of 30 years ago when I think people were talking, I think Mark Dixon was saying that everyone will be working from home, the death of the offices. It didn't happen, and because the fact is we want to be together. So I think things will change, and in the short term, obviously, you can see it's going to be difficult but you come from fairly strong background. I mean, office vacancy rate in central London is only 4%, which is lower than the long-term average. Derwent is only 1%. It will go up a bit. You may see some changes to flexi working. I suspect, you know, what, 120, 130 off flex operators. I suspect there'll be a amalgamation there, and people may be less willing to occupy very densely spaced flexi working, but the really good providers, people like the Office Group, will probably work well with it. But I just think it's going to be more adaptable space. But I think wellness, particularly, people thought about wellness and sustainability. Brian touched on this earlier about sustainability. I think thinking about how that can be climate change and how that will affect people's lives, I think will be a really important part of the decision making. And reality is rents represent about 10 to 15%, normally about 10% for most office operators. You know, much higher, I'm sure, for retail. But actually, rental decisions are less important. What is more important is what is the quality of the space? Can I have it naturally ventilated? Do I have breakout areas? Do I have wellness? Can I get on the roof terrace? And again, some of the points people were making earlier, what are our streets like? Are they cleaner? Can we breathe better? So maybe we'll have to work with government on traffic and other such things. And again, that plays, I think, to WPA's strengths, because we are raising all these issues to a high level to Westminster and other councils, and hopefully will listen to us. So near term, more difficult, more disruptive. Long term, people love their offices.
Thank you, Paul. Conscious of time, we've kind of gone quite quickly. Olivia, how do you think the industry and policymakers should be working together to improve the city's resilience to kind of health, economic and environmental risks for the future? Quite a tough question. But.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Westminster City Council have brought in a sustainability committee which oversees everything that Westminster do, and the WPA have been working with them. So I think you know, sustainability and the environment will, instead of being a sort of a factor of a decision, will become more prevalent in a lot of our decision making, you know, particularly around rebuilding properties, but also how people occupy those properties. And I'm sure Brian and Paul would agree that's not just, you know, that's people's homes, but that covers all sectors. You know, there's already been talk on some of the sort of meetings that we've had with the City Council or with the local MP about continued freight consolidation, continued waste consolidation, in order to reduce the amount of transport sort of around the city. And as Paul said, you know, in offices, well-being is changing. People are very focused on that, and I think you know, we will all have to adapt how we work in our offices to make sure our staff are okay and you know, well looked after. And there will be a temporary shift while, you know, we continue to sort of have social distancing. But I think that one of the things that this has shown us with people working from home is that, you know, you can do that. And I think that not full-time working from home, I think some people are finding that quite difficult, but I think more working from home and more flexibility in how people work, which we've all been carrying out at the moment, is something that I think employers will move towards. You know, there have been demands for it, and I suppose the status quo has maintained, but I think that that's going to be broken down a lot, and I think that will contribute quite significantly. I think in people's housing, you know, a lot of the same things apply, but you know, there's been a lot of work, particularly, you know, my sort of area, which is rental housing, about giving people stability in those rental housing, giving slightly longer tenancies, you know, not having unknown rent heights, and quite a lot of work has been done on that. And unfortunately, some of the work that was being done on it, which was the abolition of Section 21, which is about evictions, has ceased. But I'm sure that that will come back on the agenda, and the value that we apply to those that earn less and provide key services, and their health and well-being will increase. You know, the work that some people have done, you know, we're all safely working from home, but the work that some people have put in over the last few months has been quite extraordinary, and I think they need to be rewarded for it.
Absolutely.
Right, I'm going to move on to the final question, if I could get an answer from each of you just in 30 seconds, please, and then we're going to just move on to some Q&A, just conscious we've got sort of 10 minutes left. So just the final question, we sort of touched on it already, but what ways can the WPA board and also the WPA NextGen work together to be supporting Westminster post-COVID? So just sort of 30 seconds from each of you, please. So Paul?
Well, I think we've seen some of the strength of the board of WPA recently with calls to Westminster Council and other boroughs, either the city and also obviously we've been talking to Camden. So working and communicating is the most important thing. I think you have to accept that us grey-haired old men and our 40-year-old CEO women don't know every answer. So I would encourage those who've got ideas to come bring those ideas towards us and think, you know, what can be changed for the good, and work together, because I think we've all got a voice and those voices should be shared. So I would encourage dialogue between our groups.
Yeah. Brian?
Well, I very much go along with that. I think this very sudden change requires fresh thinking and fresh approaches, and that can come from both the board and the NextGen group. NextGen doesn't have the baggage of the world we spent our working lives in, and some of that is going to be shed very rapidly, I think. And as landlords, we are just space providers. We've got to support our tenants, improve that relationship, but also take a wider view of what we do. And if we want to get communities on our side, we've got to have a voice in some of these wider issues where I think we can make a difference around sustainability, providing better environments for people, and also this pushing of flexibility and things which have been quite rigid for a long time, and the issues around, well, repurposing of buildings, which is quite a sustainable thing. All those topics we can keep on the agenda, and I think we as an industry and the group, the WPA, have got an awful lot to contribute to that, and I think people will now listen.
Yeah, certainly. And Olivia, just to finish up.
Really, just to reiterate the point of collaboration, I found that absolutely fascinating, working with the property sector, but also with the retail sector, and hearing what the theatre sector got to say, you know, listening to our tenants in the different forums. That's been fascinating, and I really hope that continues. And I think there's a lot of other lessons that we've learned, you know, whether it's about flexible working, whether it's about, you know, how we live, that we must make sure, and, you know, whether it's about the benefits that Brian talked about less pollution in the West End, and really hope that we don't lose the lessons that we've learned, and we continue to sort of expand on those going forward. And I think WPA is really well placed to represent, you know, the wider community with Westminster City Council and the GLA on those matters.
Yeah. Right, we're just going to move on to some Q&A, and just to sort of kickstart that off, we've actually had two questions that are relatively similar around future employment. So firstly from Amanda, who is the WPA NextGen Vice Chair and Asset Manager at Grosvenor, has said NextGen colleagues may feel a sense of fear surrounding their current and future employment. What opportunities have evolved for the NextGen colleagues out of the pandemic, and what examples have you seen that sort of have impressed you? And we've also had a question from Liv Ha, who's a MSc graduate, who's again said, what do you think of the employability opportunities in the months to follow, and what's your advice? So Paul, I don't know if you can just sort of touch on that briefly around sort of current and future employment and what sort of opportunities you see out there.
Well, luckily for us, we actually have been recruiting, because we've trying to build up our FM team and all the rest of it. And I think reality is unemployment's going to spike for a bit. Sure, it's come off a relatively low figure, but unemployment is going to be there. There are going to be tenants who lose their jobs and start, and there will be an increase. But the property industry is responsible for a lot of jobs. You know, not directly but indirectly. If you think about all the jobs that are created for cleaning and security and the construction, all those other things, and actually by investment we can hopefully rebuild and make sure that London is stronger again. So those are all of us well financed. We should be thinking positively about trying to invest and trying to recruit people we can. So luckily for Derwent, we've never had to make anyone redundant. We're not intending to be. and where we can expand things. So I think people knocking the door. I joined in 1983 on a little thing called the miners' strike that Brian may will remember. Olivia's far too young for that sort of thing, but you know, things are terrible. I think, you know, the economy was in terrible shape. No one was a job, but I managed to get through it through luck and judgment. So I think I would advise anyone who's looking for a job, you're joining a fantastic industry that behaves really responsibly. Ignore a lot of the bad press because it doesn't represent any of our companies. We are different. We work with our communities. We are responsible. So keep knocking on people's doors, and you'll succeed.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then I think finally we've got a question from Martin Smith at Borough 4. So this is I think for Brian or Paul. So yeah. Whoever wants it. Does COVID-19 finally now mean that Oxford Street should be fully pedestrianised? This would support clean air for Londoners and Derwent's pledge for zero carbon for 2030.
Well, I think it's sort of cleaned itself up at the moment. So other than a few electric buses cruising up and down, not much happens on Oxford Street. I think the street itself, the streetscape is changing. You'll be amazed at the amount of paving works and resurfacing Westminster Council have been up to in the last 8 weeks. I've never seen so much activity on the street. So obviously not much social distancing going on there from Conways, but never mind, it's getting done. I think pedestrianisation is not the answer to Oxford Street. It went off the agenda some time ago. I think traffic managed is possibly a more sensible solution and looking at it as a district, which the council's doing. But the prospect of completely closing it to traffic, which is fine when there are people around, but you end up with a wasteland and an invitation of antisocial behaviour when it's closed at other hours. It just doesn't work. So again, I think we're finding a lot of city centres, they have this wholesale pedestrianisation sometimes sanitises life out of the city. So I think there are other solutions coming through, but it was good to hear on the call with the leader the other day. She said, well, actually air quality's gone up to the top of our agenda at the City Council now because they realised us Westminster residents will be calling for something to be done. Going back to the old ways is not acceptable. So it's taking a broader view of just one street and looking at all the pollution issues. And again, buildings have a big part to play with that. You know, buildings are serious emitters of air conditioning and things like that. Those things we need to address as an industry. You know, just closing off the traffic is not the whole problem.
I agree with all that. I mean, I would. We are committed to our net zero carbon, but I maybe legalise the use of electric scooters. Every other capital city seems to allow them to be buzzing around, and get some cars off and get some electric scooters going, and that sort of encouragement. So I wouldn't completely pedestrianise it, but I would deal with traffic and maybe get some of the dirty buses off. But you've got to get big also about disabled people and how they get to their offices and the shops and the rest of it. It's not a simple solution.
Could electric scooter drivers possibly observe the highway code if they're going to be moving around at speed?
I'm sure they would. It's like all cyclists; they always comply as well, so that's fine. Yeah.
Well, thank you both. We've actually had a lot more questions, but we've run out of time, so we will perhaps email you if that's okay, and ask for kind of a written short response. And then that brings us to the conclusion of this event. So a special thank you to three of you for being so generous with your time and sharing your thoughts on this topic. I'm sure everyone's found your insights interesting in what is quite an uncertain time for the real estate industry. Change seem to be the buzzwords on this webinar. For those that would like to share this event with your colleagues or circle back to any answers, this webinar has been recorded and it will be shared with the WPA's NextGen social media channels. Thank you for the audience for participating as well. We had a really good turnout, and also to our sponsor, Gardner and Theobald, for supporting the WPA NextGen. So we wish you all the best, stay well, and we hope to see you at the next event. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.